All right, welcome to this extra credit module. This is a presentation that I'm sharing with all of you on counselor identity and the Enneagram. So hopefully at this point you have watched the introduction to the Enneagram that was within this module, you have taken the assessment, and you have also watched the video that was posted on Enneagram stances. So that will prepare you for this presentation. The learning objectives throughout this module are listed here. The first one is to just identify what and define what is counselor identity and why it's important within this journey in this Masters of Counseling program. Second objective is understanding identity style theory. So as we look at counselor identity, we're going to look at the different styles that people typically take on when trying to formulate their identity. The third learning objective is becoming familiar with the Enneagram and attachment theory. Another theory that is within this module is the object relation theory, and we're going to just talk about how these kind of intertwine and allow a lot of this to make sense from a counselor's perspective. And the last learning objective is to identify a practice that offers space for you developing your counselor identity. So you're going to learn about concepts, you're going to learn about this assessment tool, you're going to learn about theories, and then you're going to navigate how to take on some of the style that you have in embracing identity and how you are going to go about practicing formulating your identity. So we're going to go ahead and get started with counselor identity. So this is an important aspect of the CACREP standards. So for all of you, just being aware that your program that you are in at Waynesburg University is CACREP accredited, and many of you probably looked for this school because it was CACREP. Excuse me. And counselor identity is a huge piece to this. They really look to make sure that students are going through this program and they are recognizing and knowing who they are as a counselor. So counselor identity is cultivating an identity that incorporates both the profession of counseling, so who you are in that role as a counselor, and your authentic self. There needs to be a blend. Showing up as a counselor in your authenticness of who you are and who you have been created to be is a huge part of your overarching counselor identity. So to formulate the following, when we're thinking about counselor identity, you want to have a personal definition of counseling, kind of like a personal mission statement. This can be kind of worked out and worked on ongoing process. And then second, identify a responsibility for personal growth. What are you going to be doing as this professional in the field to continue to grow professionally? If you get to the place along this journey where you are a licensed counselor, you will have to do continuing education credits, but even within the expectation that is being held for you, you need to take responsibility for your own personal growth, and that should also be happening now as a student. So the third is to recognize that professional identity is linked to larger systems. So when we are working towards professional growth, we are looking at the American Counseling Association. We're looking at bigger organizations. We're looking at the community at large. We are a huge professional population in this world, and so there's many communities that you can be a part of when we're thinking about our professional identity. And so what makes this process challenging? That's the question that many people wrestle with when we think about counselor identity. And there are many reasons that this is a challenge. When you enter into a program, as you guys have just done, there is a lot of expectation. There are a lot of things that need done. You have probably written many to-do lists already. And many of you have jobs, so you're working. Some of you have children. As we are working towards a specific profession, and this one in particular, we are traveling along our journey with many, many responsibilities. So it's very, very easy to place yourself, because we're already the helper, to place yourself last and to not focus on your own personal growth and to try to sort through your own identity as a counselor. I think that what makes this process the most challenging is that it is just the one that can be pushed aside fairly quickly. And so we need to be mindful that this professional role is crucial to finding our counselor identity, because we are helping other people. People's lives are being placed in our hands. And so we must take care of ourselves, and we must understand who we are and what makes ourselves get frustrated or angry, or what makes ourselves feel overwhelmed. And so hopefully this will be just the start of that journey for all of you. So this is a theory called identity style theory, and this was founded by Brzezinski in 1989. These are 3 types of identity processes, and they're going to overlap with many things we talk about in this PowerPoint. But let's just go over these 3 and just get an idea and understanding. I want you to take all 3 of them in, but you may find yourself gravitating towards one of these styles. So when we think about identity, when we think about ourselves trying to get at the core of who we are, trying to push all of the stuff, the expectations of other people, our own defense mechanisms away, and getting to the root of this, see if you can sense which one you feel a little bit like you're gravitating towards more. So the first one is diffusion avoidance style. So this typically happens when a person, they tend to avoid identity-related decisions. They're not someone who's going to go after figuring out who they are. That's kind of just on the side, in the background. It may be too much for them. They may be focusing on other people, but they're going to avoid identity-related decisions until required by external pressures. So unless somebody is forcing them or making them do something to foster some sort of identity growth, that's not going to maybe happen on their own. The second style is normative style. So these people tend to embrace identity standards held by significant others. So they may look out into the world and see people who they look up to, who are significant in their life, and they may take on some of their identity. It just seems like a natural normative style. That looks appropriate, that looks good, and start to embrace it. And the third style is this informational style. So these people tend to seek and evaluate information regarding identity before making decisions. So I think a key word here is seek. So these people are going after information and wrestling with it and reading about it to make a decision about a commitment to their own identity. So those are just an intro to counselor identity, what it is, what makes it challenging, why it's important. And these are 3 types that are going to come back up at the end of this PowerPoint, but I wanted you guys just to get an intro on them. So diffusion avoidance style, avoid it. They avoid the identity decision. Normative, they embrace identity standards of those who are around them. And informational style is when they are seeking out information about identity and looking for ways to make decisions about and around their identity. I've said this in this class before, and I guess I tend to repeat things that I really like. But self-awareness does lead to self-direction. So when we're thinking about the Enneagram, hopefully you guys got a little bit of background through those videos. But a lot of people will look at the Enneagram and say that it is very self-seeking and self-absorbent. Like, you find out all these things about you and you're excited and you're like, yeah, that's so true, and then you can laugh with your friends. People follow things on Instagram that represent just this surface level picture of certain types, and that's the one aspect of the Enneagram that I don't love, because I see it as such a transformational tool. So Ian Cron, who wrote the book The Road Back to You, an excellent first read if you don't know anything about the Enneagram, said that the Enneagram doesn't put you in a box. It's supposed to say put you in a box. It shows you the box you're already in and how to get out of it. So that's the goal here. The goal for this module is just to help you guys recognize your box, or wake you up a little bit in self-awareness and be able to access different things that you can do to lead to some self-direction about who you will be as a counselor, because you're going to look differently than one of your peers in your class. Your counselor identity will not be the same as everyone in your room. It will not be the same as your own counselor that you see. So I just wanted to leave that nugget of wisdom there for you guys. And what we're going to do now is we are going to begin the journey through the Enneagram, and I'm going to go over each type so you can have a better understanding of what these types are. And just so you know, I made it pretty brief because I really wanted the focus to be around counselor identity, and so I want to get into that more. And so this is a brief description and understanding of these types. Okay, we'll start with the Enneagram 1. So in the Enneagram world, there are many researchers, many people involved in developing even more research around, you know, the research that's been done 70 years ago. So the name of each type has always been a little bit not completely a standard name. There's been many different names for each type. So I only listed one, and I will tell you a few of your other ones if you're a type with more than one name. But the Enneagram 1 is the reformer. There are people that like to call this type the perfectionist type. I personally feel like perfectionist is pretty strong in terms of the ways in which the Enneagram 1 navigates the world. It's not all about perfection, so I didn't want that to be an overarching theme. But the Enneagram 1 is the reformer. I also like to call this number the principal type. And why I like to call it the principal type is because Enneagram 1s are very aware of right and wrong. They have a strong, strong gut feeling of the ways things should go in the world. And oftentimes they are right. They are people of order. They have very, very high morals, and they really do shine a light into the world of the ways in which we should be considering doing things. So the Enneagram 1 also has this underlying anger that will come up because the 1 wants to be a really good person. Their desire is to be a good person, and so they often will keep anger at bay because that makes them feel like they're not a good person. Okay, Enneagram 2. So Enneagram 2s are known as the helper, and I think as counselors we may tend to navigate towards a helping profession, of course. Doesn't mean that you're definitely the helper on the Enneagram. They often will say that when people take the Enneagram assessment and they are in the helping profession or they're moms, the helper tends to be the first type that presents itself. This was actually one that presented to me, but I'm not a 2. So I thought that, and I think mainly because of the work that I do in answering some of the assessment questions. So, you know, if you are a 2, not saying you're not, just hold all of these types loosely as we work through this, and maybe you'll find that another one speaks more to you. But the 2 is the helper, and they focus all of their time and thinking on relationships. They want to help other people. They want to make the world better for others. They're the helper. They're the one that if you caught them in the middle of the night because you were stuck and stranded on the road, they would not complain at all. They would be so happy to come help you. So we probably all know these people in our lives. The part with the 2 is that they really do believe that everybody else's issues and problems and needs are way more important than theirs. So there's a subtle pride issue there, that they don't have as many needs as everyone else, and that's not true. They have just as many needs, and they are not kind of leaning into making sure that their needs are met. So that's the 2. Enneagram 3 is the achiever. So the 3 is, I'm sure we all know a 3 in our life, but they love getting things done. They are oftentimes, you probably follow some 3s on your Instagram pages. They are oftentimes the people who want to influence other people and encourage them and cheer them on. So I think that platforms like Instagram and Facebook are places where 3s find themselves just wanting to encourage and influence. But they really are action oriented. They're very futuristic. When they set out to do something, they do it. And the hardest thing for 3s is that they have a huge fear of failure. We all struggle with failure, but Enneagram 3s really struggle with failure. Okay, the next 3. The next 3 Enneagram types is the 4, 5, and the 6. So Enneagram 4s are known as the individualists. They are, they love to be unique. They love to be original. They have this core desire and fear that is almost works against one another. So they want to be unique and have their own identity and be different, but at the same time they fear that they might be too different. So they really live in this world of feeling envy, but then also loving that they're just so different, and then feeling like they're missing out on something, and it's just a constant swinging. But these types are the most creative. They have the most depth. They are the creative people in our world. So not every musician is a 4, but oftentimes you will see that people who write poetry, music, they can provide the language a lot often to the words or experiences that we're having. So I know many of you have songs that you're just like, that's exactly what I'm feeling, and I could never access it, but the musician or the writer could. And so these people have a lot of depth, but they struggle with envy. 5s are the observers, and they also are known as the investigators. So 5s spend a lot of time in their headspace. They really like to observe, take in information and knowledge, and hold on to it in case it's needed for anything. They feel like safety is in their mind, and they never want to take up a whole bunch of space. They want to just be able to take everything in and gain the knowledge. 5s also lack energy. They only have so much energy in a day. So for another number we spoke of, for example, like a 3, or later we'll talk about 7s. Some numbers wake up and they just go, 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 go. A 5 doesn't operate like that. A 5 will have so much energy, and every single thing they do is like one less coin. And when they get to the bottom, when they have no energy coins left, they're done. They really have no energy left. So that's the observer or the investigator. And these are like the engineers in the world. These are the people who can really have an objective view on things. If you have a 5 friend and you're trying to make a major decision and you don't want your emotions to get in the way, you call the 5. Call 5. They are the most objective number. Enneagram 6. This is the loyalist. So they say that the world is filled most with 6s, and it's a beautiful thing to think about, because the 6 is the loyalist. They are the most amazing friend. They're the most amazing supporter. They're funny. They have a great sense of humor. And their loyalty is in many different areas. I mean, there's loyalty to family, there's loyalty to work, there's loyalty to traditions, there's loyalty to all things, to all people, to all things. And the thing with 6s is there is often a struggle with some sort of anxiety. They may be worst case scenario thinkers to the extreme sometimes, And for sixes, what's really hard is there is this pendulum that kind of swings between wanting to be independent and then really needing support. So they have a hard time of just going out in the world and doing what they want to do without the support of someone kind of cheering them on. Okay, and the last three is the 7. So the Enneagram 7 is the enthusiast, and this type is just the life of the party. They often show up and people are excited to see them. They bring joy. They're just joyful people. They kind of go through life finding ways of tapping into joy. So with that, and with that desire for joy, they see so much potential in anything that they're a part of. So they always want to just go bigger. Why not? They're adventurous. They can be very spontaneous. And the thing that allows them to do that is they are the quickest at reframing. So they reframe for optimism and joy constantly. So if something is super sad, these are the people that are booking a trip to the Bahamas because I've had a rough couple months. They will find a way to get back to the joyful place. And so that's hard because life is not always joyful. 7s have a really hard time sitting in the hard spaces of emotions. It's extremely uncomfortable. It's excruciating for them. So 7s have to practice that, have to practice sitting in the pain. Enneagram 8 is the leader, and this type is also known as a challenger. They are very aware of the fact that the world is not a safe place, and I am going to show up and take charge. And we'll get into all this, but a lot of this is from our childhood. A lot of this is from our attachment and how we were raised, and also the way that God created us. So there is a part of the 8 that wants to lead, and they see so clearly, like the ones like what's the right way versus what's the wrong way. When they're huge advocacy people, they want to fight for justice, and the one thing that they attempt to refuse to do is to get vulnerable. And that's one area of growth for the 8, is to be vulnerable, but that can be really hard. A great example of an 8 is Mother Teresa. So people would think she's a 2, but she was an 8, and she stood up for what she believed in. There's a lot of 8s in the world that really fought for what was right and for humanity. And last is the 9. This is the peacemaker. So the 9 sits at the top of the Enneagram. We're going to look at that here in a second. And they really want to avoid conflict at all cost. They see all of humanity and all people equally, and they just love that sense of peace and equality. It's just the way that the lens that they see their world through. They're very empathetic. They struggle to know what they want or who they are. So a 9 may struggle a little bit more with even thinking about counselor identity. It's hard because everybody else matters so much, and to know even what their needs are or what their opinions are, it feels like it takes up too much space. And so 9s can easily become like the wallpaper in the room. They're there, but they're not going to be in the middle, in the center of attention. So that's a little overview of each number. I could go on and on, but I just try to make it short. So hopefully you got an understanding of those types. So let's first talk about this concept of 3 centers of intelligence. So on the Enneagram, this is a diagram of the Enneagram and the numbers and where they fall. You have the 8, 9s, and 1 is one triad, and this is the center of intelligence is doing, or it's the gut center. So these 3 numbers typically work and filter the world through their body. They have a really, really high gut intelligence, and this whole act of doing is, when we think of even attachment and going through the world is they want to be protected and they want to be respected. They want respect, and they want to know that people are going to take care of them. And when that doesn't happen, we'll talk a little bit about how that shows up. Feeling triad is the 2s, 3s, and 4s. So these types tend to filter the world through an emotional intelligence. They kind of go through a heart space as they're navigating the world. And they really, really desire connection and to feel love. Connection is huge for them. And the last triad of centers of intelligence is thinking. These types tend to filter the world through their mental facilities. So everything, it kind of runs through their head space, like logically, what's logical, what's practical, they're observing. And so feelings come later. They're not always the first thing. And this triad really wants to be acknowledged and seen. So this is, we're gonna come back to this, but I just wanted you to take in that there are 3 triads. The 8, 9s, and 1s are the gut or doing triad. The 2s, 3s, and 4s is the feeling triad. And the 5, 6, and 7 are the thinking triad. So we went over attachment theory before. Let's just touch base on this real quickly. Of course, attachment is deep and enduring emotional bond that connects one person to another across a lifespan. And when we think of childhood, that impacts our attachment as adults. So even as you're watching this, your attachment style is having an impact on how you're even like watching this module, how you'll go about attempting to identify your counselor identity. It's going to play a role. I'm going to show you how it's going to do that and ways to not allow it to push you away from your true essence. Just one quick thing I want to mention here is the fact that there is research that when 3 centers of intelligence are balanced, a secure attachment can be achieved. So kind of going back to this slide, we operate from a dominant place, okay? So if you are a 2, you are feeling dominant. If you're a 6, you're thinking dominant. However, we have access to all of these. The goal is to be balanced. I always think of a 3-legged stool, balanced with all of these, so that I bring up my feeling when it's necessary and needed, and I bring up my thinking when it's necessary and needed, and I bring up my doing. But we tend to operate from an instinctual place and a reactive place of I just feel. So for me, I just feel. For some people, they just think. They just go automatically to thinking. And so an internal conversation for myself is, okay, Shaylee, but what do you think about this? Like I will have to have an internal conversation with myself to bring up thinking or bring up doing. So I wanted to just let you guys know that as you practice bringing all 3 of those up, you actually can heal and heal your attachment. So before we jump into stances, which you watched a video on, I wanted to touch on this object relation theory founded by Melanie Klein, and I'm sure you guys have heard of it. We, of course, aren't diving into this one during this class, but object relation theory comes from the psychoanalytical theory of interpersonal relations. So it's based on observation of infants, so mother and children. Freud looked at years of children development, and this is when Melanie Klein came in and said, what if we focused on the importance of 4 to 6 months of life? Like when we're infants, is there anything happening in our unconscious that plays an effect on us as adults? And what Melanie Klein and many others after her, and I couldn't include this in all of this, found to be true is that there are things happening. And one big thing that's happening is there is this internal objects are forming. There's an implanting of objects that have an effect on us as people. And sometimes we aren't even aware of it. We have no idea. So it's what infants have seen. It's what they've seen, and it has imprinted in their brains, and they are internal images that go on to play out throughout their lives. So how is this helpful? Well, when we think of object relation theory, we see that we can uncover attachment patterns in internalized objects in childhood. And when we recognize these patterns and objects, how they're woven into the structure of self, we can start to address them. These patterns and objects could create maladaptive behaviors, things that are getting in the way of accessing our true self. And that is part of the goal of this module, is just to, even if it is a self-awareness and a slight self-knowledge, you may not get to the self-direction part yet, but recognizing that even as we're reading through Let Your Life Speak, Parker Palmer's doing a fabulous job with this as well, in this craftiness, courageous way of attempting to find our true essence. It can be a journey, and it can be hard to do in the midst of all that is going on in life. So I hope that this is even just a spark. It could be, you could just be on the brink of everything. And that's okay. It's okay. You don't have to have it all figured out just yet. So let's start. We're going to start to like pull this all together so it makes sense to you guys. And we're going to start with some Enneagram stances. So you watch the video, and these are another 3 triads. So different than the centers of intelligence. There are 3 triads that are very similar to each other when we think about stances. And we're going to start with this aggressive stance. So Enneagrams 3s, 7s, and 8s, they have a type that tends to repress feelings. So if you think that you're a 3, 7, or 8, maybe just do a little bit of self-awareness of, how do I handle feelings? Do I tend to repress them? I am a 3, and when I heard about this, I questioned it, because I am somebody who has a lot of feelings, and I'm very emotional. But what I recognize is that I take in everybody's feelings, and what usually is expressed are not my own. Those are feelings of empathy. So I repress in that way. I know what everyone else is feeling usually, except for myself. 7s tend to repress feelings because they want to reframe to something positive. And 8s repress feelings because that's vulnerability, and they don't do well with vulnerability. They need to be strong. They need to be protecting themselves, because if you remember, they truly feel like the world is not a nice place. And this aggressive stance tends to navigate independently from others. They are okay doing their thing. I mean, it's nice to get support sometimes, but if I say I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it. And if nobody's going to jump on and be excited with me, that's fine. There might be some sadness there, but they'll go for it. So when we think about this, now we're going to combine these. If you remember from the beginning, we were talking about the identity styles. So if you look at the Enneagram aggressive stance and the avoidance style, these go together really interestingly. So there's a little bit of overlap. The core fear or defense of the 3 is the fear of being worthless. The 7 is a fear of deprivation, of being without. And an 8 is a fear of being controlled, because they want to be in control. So when we think of this aggressive stance along with the fears, the avoidant identity style is one that lines up with, they're not going to probably go after figuring out their counselor identity. They have other things they're doing. So they're going to need somebody who is going to kind of push them to figure it out. So to begin working on counselor identity with these types, so think of yourself, you would maybe need to be mindful for their needs of approval and recognition. So like as a 3, 7, or 8, you need some sort of approval, permission, recognition as you're working through these issues around counselor identity. And you need time to reflect. 3, 7s, and 8s don't do a very good job of sitting and figuring this out. You're not going to, although you may have tried, you may not be the journalers of like, I'm just going to journal my feelings and try to process what is happening internally. So if you're working towards counselor identity, you're going to want to make sure you have space to slow down. Finding a mentor will help limit some inauthenticity. So each of these numbers, you know, kind of want to put a mask on. The 3s want to achieve, the 7s want to be happy, the 8s want to be in control, and they'll put a mask on to make sure that the other part of them is not revealed. And so finding a mentor to help you figure out your counselor identity would probably be the most beneficial. And it will help with you not showing up as an inauthentic person, because it would just go against what you're working towards. So I don't know if that makes sense for 3, 7s, and 8s, but when we think about counselor identity, you need to be mindful of these 3 things in helping you. Okay, Enneagram stance. This is the dependent stance. So these 3 types are very dependent. They move towards people, they walk with people, they're in it with people. This is the 1s, 2s, and 6s, and these Enneagram types tend to repress thinking. So if you think that you are, or believe that you are a type 1, 2, or 6, and I just said that you repress thinking, you may have instantly said, that's so wrong. I think all the time. I think all the time. And it's true, you do. But there's repressed thinking happening, meaning there is thinking, but it's not always productive. The two represses thinking because they think only about relationships. Not only, but their focus and most of the time spent is on relationships. And so it's unproductive. It's about things about the relationship that are never even going to happen, but just in case. Or they misinterpret something someone said or what they felt. 6s have an unproductive thinking in the area of worst case scenario. They're always preparing for the worst. Oftentimes the worst doesn't happen, so much of their planning is unproductive because nothing came of it. And the 1s repressed thinking shows up in around their inner critic. So 1s have a very strong inner critic, and they spend a lot of time trying to dispute the inner critic, talking to themselves. And so although they have the chatter of an inner critic and they feel like they're thinking all the time, it's very unproductive. So dependent stance is repressed thinking. They move towards people. They want to be with people. And this lines up with a normative identity. So when we're thinking about how the normative identity kind of walks alongside others, and they will take on some of the identity of the significant people in their lives, it's easy for Enneagram 1s, 2s, and 6 to do that because they are right there with people. So when we think of Enneagram dependent stances and normative identity style, let's first look at these core fears and defenses of each number. So an Enneagram 1, the fear of being wrong. They really don't like to be wrong. They like to be right. Oftentimes they are right, but they have a core desire to be right, but they also fear being bad. So fear being wrong and bad are up there. 2, there is a fear of being unwanted. So afraid that they won't be wanted. So of course they act by helping a lot of people so that there is a want there that they've created. A 6, there's a fear of being unprepared. What if they aren't prepared for whatever could happen in the world? And so to begin working on counselor identities, these Enneagram types need to be mindful of their hyper-focus on skills and knowledge. They really want to know how to do things, how to do them well. And you can see, you know, if you are a 1, 2, or 6 and you're going through this program, you might have already started to feel that way. As you were writing your paper, as you write your next paper, as you're writing discussion board posts, it's hyper focus on the skills and the knowledge. Am I applying the theory right? Do I know what I'm talking about? So just, try not to be too hyper focused on that. This takes away from accessing like who you are and what's happening. Practice self-care as a way to look inward. Huge for 1, 2s, and 6s. Self-care is extremely important for all people. Doesn't even matter, but counseling professionals specifically. And this type is a great way to try to work on counselor identity, is to practice self-care pattern, have some sort of rhythm to take care of self. And then participating in group dialogue to hear others' opinions, values, points of views. 1, 2s, and 6 love to do that. They love to, like I said, sit with other people and hear about their opinions or values or ways that they are going about counseling would help them to be able to formulate a narrative on their own. So these are things to be aware of if you're a 1, 2, or 6, and you mesh well with the normative identity style. I think it would be a good way for you to attempt to begin to uncover your counselor identity. And the last stance, there we go. The last stance is the withdrawing stance. So this is for Enneagrams 4s, 5s, and 9s. They're in a withdrawal stance. So these types tend to repress doing, and they tend to move away from other people. If they're feeling overwhelmed, if their energy's low, if people are asking them to do a lot, they will slowly start to repress doing, and then they start moving away from people. And so when we're combining this withdrawing stance with an identity style, informational style is what seems the most fitting. So let's look at the core fears of these types. The 9 is fears conflict. Do not want to be in conflict. They will avoid conflict, probably create more conflict, but at all costs. They really just don't want to be in conflict. And the 4 is the fear of being without identity. So this is an interesting fear to have when we're thinking about counselor identity, to fear that you don't have an identity and then to be working on a counselor identity. They're going to want information. That's what we're going to talk about. And then the 5 is fear of being incompetent. They really, really have a hard time if they're feeling like they're not intelligent, competent, or have the ability to do the task in front of them. So when working on counselor identity with these Enneagram types, they need to be mindful of their it factor. Like, what's the one thing that makes them unique? What's the one thing that allows them to be who they are in a counseling role? And they really need to participate in experiential learning opportunities. So being active in professional communities, presenting at conferences, partaking in research. They need to be doing because they're repressed in their doing and withdrawing. They'll just continue to withdraw. So they almost have to act opposite to help them build up some awareness around their counselor identity. So this is a very quick, short introduction to many things. We've only touched on attachment, we've only touched on object relation, we've only touched on these identity styles and the Enneagram. And so they're all 4 combined in ways that can help you start to formulate your own counselor identity. And so I want you to go through this PowerPoint, maybe go back, and even if you're not listening to my voice, but looking at the slides of seeing where your type falls and then what the recommendation is. What would be helpful? How can you start to make plans to do some of these things that are being recommended to you to foster some sort of counselor identity growth, professional growth in that area? So what happens here is we are going to wrap up, but please know that after this there is going to be an assignment posted that you will complete, and upon completion of the assignment there is a quiz, and that quiz, once the quiz is done and all of the other things have been viewed and the assignment has been done, you will get your extra credit points. So if you have questions about this module, if you have further questions about some of the information, because there was a lot and I feel like I went through it pretty fast, so that you weren't sitting here forever, please reach out to me, let me know. I hope that it was interesting. I hope it sparked something in you that you could dive a little bit deeper with. And just know the Enneagram really is a transformational tool. So it's really whatever you want to use it for. If you just want to learn a little bit about yourself, great. If you want to learn about the core fears and how that affects your everyday life, you've got that too. So I really, really appreciate you guys for taking part in this extra credit module. I hope it's helpful to boost up your grade, give you some extra points, and I will be looking forward to your assignments and your quiz and hearing what you've learned. So thank you guys so much for being attentive, and I'll see you soon. Bye.